Well, thanks everybody for being here this morning. Payments obviously is a huge issue for this industry. And so we wanted to pull together a group of folks who really know what's going on now and into the future. And hopefully we're going to give you that glimpse of the future. But just to level set, and I think everybody, if you're here, you know how significant this is. But some of the stats are eye-opening, especially if you let them sink in. This industry does 160 million transactions a day, just about half the United States population every single day. Just over 80% of those transactions are on a payment card. It's a huge, huge number. And oh, by the way, there was only $21 billion taken out of the industry through card fees because of those transactions. I'm sure nobody in this room noticed, probably not a big deal to you, but hey, the numbers add up. So with that, look, I'm Doug Kantor, I'm NACS General Counsel. I am very happy to be here with some friends who really know this area. And let's go down in order and let them give you a little bit of their background so you know who you're hearing from. Reed, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Doug. Hi, everybody. I'm Reed Luhtanen. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of an association called the U.S. Faster Payments Council. Our role in the industry is to bring together all the different segments of the payments ecosystem. So our members are financial institutions, technology companies, merchants and other corporates, consumer advocate groups, and other associations. NACS is a member of ours. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years running different forms of payment acceptance at Walmart. So a lot of time spent on card acceptance specifically, but the last 5 years or so focused more on DDA payments. So check account-to-account type payments, pay by bank, things like that, and the future of payments and moving forward with real-time payments in the United States. So excited to be here, excited to have this conversation with these guys, and I'll let Michael go next.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. That's working?
You good?
Yeah, can you hear? Yeah, raise hand. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Michael Curry. I've been a product executive and developer inside stablecoins and digital assets for the last 7 years for world-recognized derivative exchanges as well as blockchain infrastructure. Prior to that, I was an early product hire for 3 startups that had terrific acquisitions in ad tech, software as a service, and home service marketplaces. In addition to that, I was a product sales lead for a Y Combinator-backed B2B retail startup that sold scheduling software to Old Navy, Gap, McDonald's franchisees. Most recently, I've been focused on working with fintechs to help unlock the advantages and benefits of stablecoins. And within that, built a stablecoin merchant acceptance solution that's designed specifically for merchants called Spendcodes.
Morning, everybody. My name's Lou Morsberger, and I'm the founder and CEO of Payment Strategy Consulting, LLC, or PSC. We strive to help merchants navigate the fast-evolving payments landscape. I came to founding PSC, that is, after 20 years in the payments industry, the bulk of that time with Capital One and their credit card business, where I came to be overseeing all their Visa, MasterCard, and American Express relationships. So I know how the card side of the business and the network side of the business work. And some might say I'm now atoning for past sins, having been on the card side of the business. When I left Capital One, I went over to the merchant side of the business and have since then spent the last several years advising merchants on how to navigate new fees and new technologies, such as with Merchant Link LLC, a leading payments gateway serving merchants in the restaurant and retail space. Before I went into payments, I was a retailer, and that's really in some ways where my heart still belongs. I was with a healthy foods grocery chain that was ultimately acquired by Whole Foods Markets, and I even spent a couple of years as a senior operations manager with Circuit City Stores back when they were in their heyday. So this is a little bit of a return to me being able to focus on payments for merchants with a merchant perspective.
Yeah, and look, just in case you thought you were going to be able to nap through the session, get a break, we are going to make you participate here for a minute just to get a sense from folks in the room and know who we're talking to and see how many folks out there, raise your hand if you have branded outlets. Anyone with branded outlets? Okay, pretty good number, all right. How many of you have loyalty apps? Nice, yeah. good piece of the room. Digital wallets. Okay, a few folks, not nearly as
They want to
many.
raise their hand real high, but they're
Right, we can always tell it is early, I get it. You know, you don't want to raise the hand too high. That's all right. Look, this industry is somewhat unique, especially because of the branded outlet relationship, but we know there's a tremendous amount of innovation coming in payments. And so maybe starting with you, Lou, let's walk through what do you see as the biggest challenges coming our way in payments right now?
Sure thing. No. First off are the fees. We're in an industry, and Doug, you gave a few of the statistics, but if you just look at how payments-related fees and credit card fees have increased, last year they increased 19.6%, and the year before that they increased 26.6% for C-store operators. So if you go back 10 years, these fees were a headache. A few years after that, they were a pounding headache, and really now they're at the point of being a disabling migraine. And so I think that there's enormous pressure on merchants and C-store operators to work those fees down. And the tough part of that is there's a lot of good news in terms of ways to go about that. But a second challenge after the fees is the time lag between when new payment technology and tender types become available and practical, and how quickly the industry can adopt them. So there's a few things that we'll probably be talking about this morning that you could be doing now that has been doable for a few years. Good news is these techniques and technologies are much less expensive now than they were 2 years and certainly 5 years ago, and they're within reach for you to offer a both lower fees as well as a better customer experience.
Yeah, and Michael, you want to jump in? I mean, you obviously from the technology side have a different window into this. What are the challenges you see?
So, I mean, given the panel title, it was clear that we're going to talk about fees. That's obviously a challenge, super important. But I think there's a couple, considerations that are worth going through. So first, cards have been the only contactless, convenient digital payment method for some time now. So it's not super surprising that they represent like 80% of point-of-sale transactions at this point, right? So, and when you have that kind of activity, it can create hard to negotiate dynamics for fees, right? Pretty straightforward. So, but I think the only way to actually approach that challenge is to like confront the one that we're in. And so Sequoia Capital calls these kind of markets like a hard fact product market, which essentially means just a market that's been dominated by one solution so long that the users of it generally resign to the solution as a hard fact of life, right? Despite the fact there's other innovations or solutions out there that are better aligned to their needs, like stablecoins are to business and merchants. So the reason why I bring this up for a future of payments panel is because so a lot of things have happened, especially in the last year. We have a couple outcomes in front of us, right? But to keep it simple, let's draw it down to 2 outcomes. And let's say continue some resignation, not take a new competitive digital payment method that's available, and kind of see an outcome of sameness, right, for business and merchants. Whereas if they take outcome 2 and you started developing a stablecoin strategy and taking actions on services that are available today, you get 2 things. You get savings that are coming from this competitive payment method, and typically when there's competitive opportunities out there with much lower rates, it tends to help with negotiation. So from that lens, I think it's really helpful for business and merchants to consider the stablecoin strategy like very soon and take action as soon as possible.
Yeah, so let's hang on to that piece and we'll come back to it. But Reed, give us your sense. Biggest challenges, obviously, from where you sit.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the biggest challenge right now facing this community, the retail community at large, including convenience stores, is probably a sense of complacency a little bit. I think it comes from there's a belief, and I think kind of is rooted in what you just said, right? There's like, oh, well, I have to take cards, and I'm not here to talk bad about cards, okay? Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex are all members of mine. Big banks are members of mine.
Yep.
But I think from your perspective, those guys are all engaging in conversations about the future of payments on a daily basis. They're spending hours and hours and hours every day thinking about what are these next forms of payments gonna look like, and how do they make sure that they're out there in front of everything. It's kind of like when you go to buy a car, You know, like you go to the dealership, the person who's selling you the car knows so much more about the car and the industry and everything else associated with it. You just walked into a car dealership as a person who works at a convenience store, and you don't know that. And I think it's that kind of dynamic that you're faced with if you don't have people allocated to spending the time to learn about the things that we're gonna be talking about here today, going forward and thinking about what are those opportunities that might exist, because there are new payments technologies coming around. Stablecoin's one of them. Instant payments that we're going to talk about today from the Federal Reserve and from a company called the Clearinghouse that provide a lot of green space for you to sort of establish new payment flows with your customers, especially, and we're going to talk about AI too, especially when you combine it with AI. So I think the challenge is finding the will within your organization to dedicate time and resources to working on things that are in the future of payments.
But Reed, somebody selling you a car would never try to take advantage of you in that transaction, right?
Never.
Actually, this is a really helpful point, and I think it's worth kind of emphasizing, because I actually didn't know it was going to come up, but we see this in so many ways, right? There are all these different standards bodies and different ways that the building blocks of what gets to all of us at the end product as payments get put together, and banks and credit card companies are all over them, and we'll have 10, 20, 30, 50 people show up, and there's maybe like one person from Connexus in the room or somebody like Reed, and you're looking around going, well, yeah, we have no chance here. So,
yeah. So who here, and I'm not going to get my feelings hurt, who here had heard of the Faster Payments Council before you walked in this room this morning? We got somebody. I'm going to, it's interesting. A couple
hands, great.
If these were bankers, every single hand would have gone up. Like, that's the difference.
Yeah. So let's jump in, though. I mean, I do think that's a really interesting point of challenge. But Reed, take this for a moment. You are the Faster Payments Council, right? Yep. So tell us about what are we going to get faster payments and how?
Yeah, well, I mean, the funny thing is we have them. So that's the first answer, right? So in the second quarter of this year, about $750 billion moved through instant payments rails, through the FedNow system or through the Clearinghouse. Those are primarily now being used for paying out, so gig economy payouts to like Uber drivers, wages or different forms of wage access, P2P, starting to see some loan disbursement activity. So, but that's already a sizable amount of money. It's actually, by the end of the year, there'll be more going through instant payments than there is through same-day ACH. So it's growing very quickly. The difference, Doug, I think that you're picking at here probably is, okay, well, that's great, Reed. People are getting paid that way, or they're getting their instant payments when they drop somebody off in their Uber, but nobody's walking into my store and using these types of payments. And I think that's where we are right now, is there's a lot of work that has to be done to create the experiences that need to exist for these new payment rails, which really just move money from one account to another, right? The magic of the card networks and other successful point of sale networks isn't that they move the money. That's really, frankly, the pretty easy part. The harder part is how do you have those experiences that people understand and are familiar with and that are quick and simple and easy? And that's the kind of work that's happening right now in that space, is ideating around QR codes, around directories, around APIs, and the different sort of endpoint activity, functionality and user experiences that have to exist for these things to happen at the point of sale. And that work is starting right now. People are getting interested in this. The banks are investing in it. And so I think there's, again, an opportunity here. I don't know, is that where you want me to go? Ish?
There's no right and wrong answers, okay. Reed. Come on. But it is an interesting thing. Look, our CEO, I'll bet everybody here has heard our CEO, Henry Armour, quote William Gibson saying, right, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed, right? And so the question is, right, in a sense, either kind of how do you get consumers to use it, or essentially how do you scale it? I don't know, Michael or Lou, if you have thoughts on how does that happen?
The scaling? Well, first, I would echo a lot of what Reed just put out about faster payments. Faster payments are here. If you don't know, if you have an internet connection, you have a global faster payment method today. That is an incredible achievement that's available to all. I think in terms of scale, I think I would actually piggyback on the intersection as well. I think the user experience problem is the problem that is really the one that we're overcoming right now after a couple of years of terrific infrastructure being built. on a number of years of getting some communication around people understanding that this is a legitimate method. And if I put it to the tune of data, the last 5 to 10 years for stablecoin transactions have been billions to trillions of global volume, right? Again, it's not point of sale quite yet, but it proves out the technology can be secure, can be fast, right? And it can provide an experience that makes its way through cases. And we've already seen quite a few, right? So 6 to 7 years ago, I was in a derivatives exchange where the main problem that actually got stablecoin adoption was the fact that traders were looking at putting money on exchanges. It would take 3 to 5 business days, right? And in a market that was suddenly changing where assets were moving all around the world and everything was real time, that's unacceptable, right? So now you have a group of guinea pig users, traders who have risk, who are willing to take it on in order to find a benefit and innovation for their case. Sure enough, they found it, increase volume to it, you see the market cap increase. And now you have all these other cases from B2B payments to post-pandemic payroll to remittances, right? That all say, well, I can use the same benefits as well. So for faster payments, I think there's been a lot that's happened, but there's certainly room to grow.
Yeah. Lou, you have...
Then to piggyback on that, so I think Michael, thinking about stablecoin, for example, that's one of the tender types that could be added to a digital wallet. And I think digital wallet is one of the key enabling technologies that's out there now and more affordable. If you don't already have a merchant branded app and or a merchant branded wallet with different tender types in it, those are two of the enabling technologies that then when combined with the third, think of them almost as a trifecta. You combine the wallet with low-cost payment types such as stored value cards, stablecoin, pay by bank, other links to ACH or bank account transactions, and then you combine those two things with your loyalty program, and then you have this ability to influence what tender type the customer is going to use. And you can incentivize customers inside your app and then inside your wallet to move from high-cost credit cards. Great if you can just get those high-cost credit card folks down to debit, but even better if you can move those folks over to stored value cards or ACH or other bank account related tender types. All of that becomes much easier once you've got the app and the wallet. You layer those in with the loyalty program, whether it's cents off per gallon or it's an offer to get folks into the store. And now you're not only saving money on the payment side, but you're driving incremental revenue. And that I think is the wave of the future. And neat to see how many folks raise their hand in terms of having an app, but it was fewer folks, I think, who raised a hand in terms of the wallet. And so that might be one next step in your payment stack evolution.
Yeah, and let's jump for a minute because now the stablecoin piece has come up a couple times. And Michael, I think it would be helpful. People may have very different levels of experience or knowledge here.
Sure.
Tell us how that would work for a store in terms of stablecoin type of service.
Okay, so this goes into a little bit of some of the other questions, but generally speaking, there's a couple advancements that are really terrific for point of sale, and the most important one is the fact that mobile devices are ubiquitous at this point. Why this really matters is because for customers, this has always been great. The numbers are something like 90% of US adults have a smartphone with internet capabilities. 90% of that group use 8 to 9 apps a day, including things to help their financial life, right? So, but the part that moves more into merchants is, some of these qualities are not just only for customers, they're for merchants as well. So payments.com put out a survey this year that said 71% of merchants are going to migrate from whatever their point of sale system is today to soft point of sales, which essentially are mobile devices. And the reason why is because they're ubiquitous, they're affordable, they're accessible, they're familiar. You could be a 16-year-old in your first job using it, right? You know how to use it. And you can be a 50-year-old managing them. You know how to use it. They've been dominant for 2 decades. So the reason why mobile devices are so important when it comes to something like stablecoins is because what do stablecoins and blockchain wallets, which are different than wallet apps, actually need? They need a device that's ubiquitous, that can be utilized, so it can move as 100% software to take advantage of their benefits, right? So this combination together is really hard to ignore, and is with a number of different standards that have been added to stablecoins, the bodies that are around it, the development teams that have been putting out terrific infrastructure. We're in a place right now where the user experience can happen today, and I highly recommend first taking your own stablecoin transaction by yourself without services, just so you can understand the animal. And then after that, notice that there are new services that pop up that are terrific to improve on that in a way that you can see and feel that this is a tangible point of sale method very soon, within the next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm curious, Reed, your thoughts on this, because this is a whole ecosystem and new piece of the puzzle, if you will. But there are lots of bodies, your organization and many others, have been doing payments and thinking through some of these things for a long time. Do you see engagement from cryptocurrency, stablecoin folks? Are they mixing with the traditional payments folks, or is it oil and water? Are they just off on their own thing?
I'd say more and more mixing of the two for sure. Like I'd say over the last year or so, the Genius Act certainly has accelerated that, I think. Yep. And I'm sure one of these two can do a better job explaining what the Genius Act is than I can. And also really quick, we're gonna throw a lot of jargon out just in general in this session, I'm sure, and a lot of us can be like, oh man, what are they talking about? If you, fasterpaymentscouncil.org, there's a glossary of terms there, there's lots of resources there, so just think about that as a place you can go after this session if something you heard is interesting, you wanna dig a little bit deeper. But yes, there's a lot, like financial institutions are very seriously buying into, at least the very large ones, they're very seriously buying into the concept of issuing stable coins, of using that as part of their payment flow. And I think very, at a strategic level, just making sure that they're, again, out in front of this as a new technology in this space that they want to, at the very least, understand and have the capabilities around. Even if they're not going to deploy it in every single use case you might think of, they want to be able to, right? And I think that's true for lots of different payment flows. Chase, Wells, those very large financial institutions, they have the resources to put after all kinds of things that maybe they don't all end up being the thing that drives 160 million transactions a day, but it becomes an important part of various payment flows within their portfolio. And they're very serious about it. And I think there's also the aspect of it, and this is getting a little bit in the weeds on financial institution management, but if you're one of these large financial institutions that's able to successfully deploy a stable coin that becomes a de facto currency, now all of a sudden you've got people who are moving, their deposits are actually on your balance sheet, which is good for you as a financial institution, even if in their minds the money is at their local community bank, the community bank doesn't get credit for that deposit as being on its balance sheet. It stays with Chase or Wells or whoever issued that stable coin. So it can be advantageous for them for that perspective too. So yeah, there's a lot of interest from that side of the ecosystem.
Yeah, so it's super interesting, one, that's happening, but I will tell you, I would think, retailers' ears, convenience store folks, hearing that it's the traditional financial institutions and how excited they are may bring some trepidation that those guys have not been our friends on a lot of these things and may not deploy them well. So maybe Lou, let me jump to you with this question. Look, you started with the cost and the fees as the challenge and the pain point. As we get into this future and have these new solutions, to what extent is that going to impact costs, or are the big guys just going to lock it up and we won't see the benefit there?
No, great question. I'm a big believer that the cost will come down. The economic pressures are too great, as we've talked about, rising fees. The technology is increasingly affordable, and it is available both to the merchants and the consumers. And when you add those two things together, I think you've got tremendous opportunities for merchants overall to renegotiate their relationship with the payments industry. Now, in some cases, that means your relationship with your processor or your acquirer. But I think in the future, we will see merchant opportunities to directly negotiate with Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and so forth. I'm a big fan of merchant buying groups. In other industries, they'd be called group purchasing organizations. And you see them in the healthcare industry, in the grocery industry, the hospitality industry, where merchants come together, aggregate their volume, and then that aggregated volume gives merchants a much stronger negotiating position than they would have on their own. So if you're a $5 million operator, or a $50 million, or a $500 million, or a $1 billion operator, you have more leverage if you have a buying group, if you belong to a buying group, and that buying group is then knocking on the network's doors to say, hey, we have $10 billion or $25 billion of aggregated volume, we deserve a better deal. And not just do we have the volume, we have the ability to influence where that volume moves over time. So I think that will be a key part of the cost equation in the not too distant future.
Yeah, go ahead.
Really quick, I think adding on to that a little bit is, because these things are new, because this is not a well-defined space from a user experience perspective, from an economics perspective, I'd say this is true for stablecoin and also for new payment rails like instant payment rails. The financial institutions are very interested in finding partners who are interested in working with them to develop this stuff and to deploy it. So I think there's opportunities that exist in this space right now that are going to sort of crystallize over the next few years into ways that either you're part of or you're not. So I think we're in a really interesting time right now in terms of there being real opportunities to get creative and deploy solutions that are more to your liking maybe than they will be if you're not participating in that conversation.
Yeah, and Michael, curious about your perspective too on this cost issue with these future technologies. Where do you see the impacts going there?
So it's hard to predict a future, but the reason why I took a career and focused on stablecoins is because the cost structure by itself is really compelling, right? For global, you're already seeing a lot of development movement. For local, it has a lot of advantages too. I think the only thing I can really put to make the local thing a little bit clearer is for a stablecoin acceptance solution like Spendcodes, right? The talking point that makes this really easy is stablecoins have the possibility of dropping your transaction rate 2%, right, for every transaction, and then doing that in 2 seconds for settlement. There's a lot of other details that I can get into. But that net scope gives you the idea that user experience is here, right? It just needs to come to form and get distribution. One other thing that I wanted to kind of come back to about distribution as the challenges within it, right? Is that if you're looking at mobile phones, and mobile phones are really everywhere, distribution becomes as fast as a digital download, right? So when you think about growth of something like stablecoins and adoption, you might have been like, oh, this might happen in a decade from now. But when you boil it down to the fact that it's 100% software, so all it really needs is a mobile device to get an app to. That speed is a lot different than in the 90s trying to activate point of sales by pushing click-clack machines and carbon paper, right? It's a different story. That's a very hard growth challenge to get the ball rolling. So I think from that perspective, I think there's a lot of chance for seeing adoption in the very near term, especially on the back of the Genius Act and regulation.
I'd piggyback on Michael's comment there that I think with stablecoins, I have this theory that we may see the earliest stablecoin adoption in remittances, and that folks who have remittance capabilities in their C-store operations, whether it's with MoneyGram or Western Union or whomever, that folks sending remittances will see a tremendous cost savings as soon as they begin to send remittances with stablecoin. And so if you've got folks coming into your stores that, whether it's in your store or elsewhere, that are involved in remittances, they will likely be some of your first customers to have a stablecoin capability. And so if you have a digital wallet, then that's a very quick step to allowing them to pay with a stablecoin right in your store, which, by the way, is at very low cost. I just think it's interesting that we may see stablecoin adoption being driven by a part of the market that we might not have been expecting.
Yeah, and let me go back to you really quick on this, Lou, because I think that's a helpful point. This remittance thing is real, and I think there's a piece of it. And we spend a ton of our time focusing on the individual customer interaction at stores. But what about business-to-business payments? Are these technologies going to affect business-to-business, and what do you see there?
Absolutely. So when you think about both stablecoin and faster payments, it won't just be at the customer-facing direction. It'll also be in your back office. So you will be able to pay vendors much more quickly You'll be able to reconcile invoices much more quickly. That reconciliation, I suspect there are folks in here who have invoices being reconciled already with the help of various AI capabilities. I think that'll be much more widely adopted. So when you combine those two things, then you add in, let's not forget, replenishment capabilities being, I'm starting to touch on the AI topic here, but when you combine AI and stablecoin in various ways, your back office functions become much more productive as well, and with much lower cost and much happier staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and let's jump into that AI piece. And Reed, maybe you want to speak to this. People are talking about this as agentic commerce. Can you explain that and tell us where you're seeing AI play into this payment space?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think agentic AI or agentic commerce is something like it's a jargon that we've come up with to make it sound like really mystical or high tech or something. But really, it's essentially, instead of you've got a bot that you've empowered to make decisions and do things on your behalf. So you've got potentially, say, a AI bot that you've said, hey, you can go out and find a new jacket because this jacket, I don't like it anymore and I want a new one. And it'll look around and it'll be like, oh, there's the jacket, it's in your size and it's the right price or whatever. And it'll potentially even go through the transaction and buy it for you. I think that's, and that's on the retail side, right? But to Lou's point, there's a lot of opportunities for agentic AI within the back office activities as well. So if you think about, and there's a really interesting, I think, confluence between modern payments and AI in that regard too. So if you think about a back office employee, right? They work 9 to 5, they show up, they do their job, and maybe they send off a bunch of payments, and it doesn't really matter if they come in, if they arrive that day or next day, because they're gonna go home and they're gonna go to sleep and they're gonna have dinner and all that stuff. The bot is not gonna do any of that. The bot is gonna sit there, and as soon as money comes in, the bot is able to do something with that. If it's the middle of the night, whenever it happens. So the ability to move transactions back and forth 24 hours a day, all day, every day, in an intelligent manner, not just automated, but with intelligence. That's a big difference. Is going to, in the combination of that with the actual payment rails or stablecoin rails, whatever, and that enables that money to actually move in real time, you can have a lot more productivity in the economy in general and for your business specifically.
Well, that's pretty good. I'm not sure how much intelligence we have now, so hey, that maybe we'll be better off at that point. Michael, how about you? Are you seeing AI in this, and how so?
Yeah. So for me, for AI, I kind of just approach it more as a curious tech user versus personal, professional interest in it. But to Lou's point, the back office and inventory management, things that you can offload to a bot that is scoped, provided stable coins because they're meant for that kind of transaction because they're programmable by design. These are the type of things that you see are really important game changers that are happening right now. I was just talking to Lou and saying that it was surprising to me that at this point, I can't even mention a name brand right now for a service that does that, but I can almost bet on the fact that in 3 to 6 months, we're gonna have a name brand that you're gonna know really well that's gonna take on some of these cases, and it saves a tremendous amount of time and money.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me take a moment here to say, we do want, if folks have questions, there are mics in the middle of the room. Go stand at the mic and we'll get to your questions. We've got a bunch more to cover. I could talk to these folks all day long and love it, but don't be shy. If you have questions, go ahead up to the mic so I can see you and we'll get to those questions and jump in. But let me ask this. I know sort of personal topic of interest to me and I think of many folks in our industry, and maybe I'll start, Lou, with you on this. There's this legislation out there, right? There's this Credit Card Competition Act. Give us your sense, let's say that passes, what does that look like for C-store owners on the ground?
No, sure thing. CCCA, the Credit Card Competition Act, would require that credit cards could be processed by 2 unrelated networks. So it tries to mimic what the Durbin Amendment did coming out of the Great Recession for debit cards, which also have to be able to be processed by 2 independent networks. So in the under CCCA, imagine you have a Visa card. Now that card would have to also be able to be processed not just by Visa, but by an unrelated network. So think, for example, NICE or Star or Pulse, not owned by Visa, not owned by MasterCard. So that empowers merchants then to cut deals, and it'll remain to be seen who you're cutting the deals with, and it could be that you're cutting them with your processor or your processor is cutting them with the networks. I think that'll need to be sorted out. But it creates this ability for competition as to which networks are going to process any given credit card transaction. And I think CCCA envisions in the near term, shortly after passage, you'd see a reduction in particular in the processing fees component of what you're paying right now for payments processing. And that's a smaller part of the total picture. But then as CCCA gets sorted out, you'll also see pressure on interchange as the competing networks. If you had Visa or MasterCard on one hand as one of the networks on a credit card, and then you had, say, Pulse as the other, suddenly now those networks have to compete for the merchant's business, and that competition will take place with an emphasis on cost. So that is another important mechanism for to inject competition and lower fees into card processing.
Yeah, and one of the ways to think about it, and Michael, I'm curious about your perspective on this, is there is a lot of concern about the traditional financial institutions, the traditional credit card companies locking up some of these new technologies, whether it's stablecoin or what have you. And the thought is, wait a minute, if you can break up that bottleneck and the market power of those guys up front going into some of this, that leaves more open running room for the new technologies. Curious about your perspective there.
Yeah, the only thing that really comes to mind is for many folks that I've spoken to, whether they're executives or operators or merchants themselves, a lot of times they'll say today, like, where are these stablecoin customers? But the thing that has happened, especially in the last 3 to 6 months, is that there's been enormous growth in stablecoin cards, right? And you might not even notice it. But what you might notice is some of these cards have the highest rates in history, all right? So when we're talking about the outcomes of the world, depending on where this technology stands right now, it's like the opportunity moment, right? There's a possibility for merchants to be able to be their own flywheel engine, roll up their sleeves and take care of this problem themselves and take something in that truly benefits them and has incentives behind it. There's also another outcome of the world where these stablecoin cards and other innovations do really well, and they just continue on and things stay the same. And so I think that's kind of, that's the closest thing I have in mind.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And Reed, I'm curious about your perspective on this. There's that aspect of it, but in this interesting way with some of these new technologies, there may be other ways that things like card rewards and this other stuff happens versus, well, let's just take a bunch of money from the merchants.
Yeah, I think, first of all, backing up a step, I think it's important to, I know we often talk about card sort of as a blanket term. I think it's really important when you get into some of these conversations to make sure you're thinking about credit cards and debit cards as two separate beasts, right? Because one of them is issuing a line of credit, and today, to Lou's point, there's one network on every credit card, and potentially if Doug has his way, there'll be two sometime in the future. The FPC is explicitly neutral on that act for obvious reasons. Debit is very different already, right? There's lots of ways to access a checking account today. There's the debit card, which has two networks on it. There's checks, there's ACH, there's wire, there's now instant payment rails. So there's lots of different ways to get into those accounts or to get money out of those accounts into your account as a merchant. So I think that's important to remember and think about, because a lot of the opportunities that maybe are created down the road with credit with things like CCCA for retailers already exist when it comes to debit. And coming from Walmart, I would expect that you guys have a lot of debit transactions. And so sorry. So in terms of loyalty, I think there's a really interesting opportunity there, because I mentioned that sort of esoteric fact about the balance sheet with stablecoins and all that stuff with financial institutions. But the fact is, there are lots of different ways that the economics can mix and lots of different transfers of value that can happen in a retail transaction that aren't the merchant handing money to the customer's bank, right? So there's data there, there's all kinds of different marketing opportunities and advertising and in-app promotions that can be created through partnerships with financial services companies, with financial institutions, with networks that don't result in or require that you pay 2.9% per transaction to the issuing financial institution. It's, oh, well, if you provide this data or that data, or you provide this type of ad in your app, things like that, that can be exchange of value that don't actually cost you something the way that card swipe fees can.
Yeah, and so I think that is super helpful, and it does help to think about these things differently and not generically, and probably I'm the worst offender and with loose language. But since you did mention it, Reed, I'm going to put you on the spot here as former Walmart guy. And look, Walmart has built a team of some of the most forward-thinking payments people there are
After I left.
No, it was all you starting it. It's the whole, news just broke, right, that Walmart has this deal with OpenAI. I'm sure we don't have all the details there, but it looks like working with OpenAI to spur some of this agentic commerce. And there's some data sharing there. Curious your thoughts on that, and is that the wave of the future now we're going to see with a bunch of companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, although I think I would go back to that quote you used earlier from your CEO about the future is here, but it's unevenly distributed, right? There's going to be, I think, a very, very wide gap between people who are very quick adopters and using this stuff very, very, way out there, and other people who are like, I'm not going to touch it. So I think that will be the case. So I think there'll be plenty of people who don't, plenty of people who are alive today who will never have an AI agent, right? They'll just never do it. But plenty of people who will. And I think the thing that makes it particularly interesting in a conversation about payments is one of the biggest hurdles out there in terms of what merchants are trying to do with payments and trying to get people to adopt things like Spendcodes or different access methods to try to access funds out of different accounts is the effort of switching by the individual human beings that you're trying to convince to do something different than what they're used to doing. In a lot of ways, once that human being has given agency to a bot that is always on, works at the speed of light, and doesn't get bored or tired or frustrated, the ability to then open up these different payment flows it's a lot easier to do because the cost of switching goes away for the human being. They no longer care that there's different forms that have to be filled out to open up a new account at Walmart or Target or Buc-ee's or, sorry, they're not a member.
We love them all.
Quick Trip.
We love them all.
Whatever, and I think that opens the door to a lot more fragmentation when it comes to different accounts being used in different ways for the same person, and also to Lou's point about wallets, a lot more different wallets potentially being more feasible for human beings because they're not managing it, their bot is.
Yeah, and thank you. That is helpful. And let me ask this, Lou, just sort of building on that point. We see this Walmart deal. I'm sure there's other stuff in the works. But part of what NACS's mission has always been is to drive value and get the benefit for everybody, no matter their size, sophistication, and folks in the industry. So talk to me about buying groups, and are these types of deals possible, or are sort of distant cousins of them possible? How would a buying group look into this type of thing?
Absolutely. Closer than distant cousins. I think they're very related in the sense that a buying group with numerous merchant members is well positioned to take on a lot of this complexity on behalf of merchants. So, not every C-store is out there designing their own automatic fuel dispenser, obviously. So similarly, when it comes to payments, as we think about the number of complementary technologies involved in processing a transaction, the number of different vendors you have to relate to, and now potentially thinking about, okay, well, how is AI going to impact that? Buying groups would be well positioned to represent numerous merchants in terms of negotiating the deals, and not just the financial terms, but what level of service is expected, and really take a lot of that complexity off the plate of merchants and representing merchants to just essentially ensure that they're getting a very competitive and ideally a preferential deal versus if they weren't part of a buying group. So I see that as all complexity basically needs to be managed much more cleanly, perhaps, in the payment space for merchants than it has in the past. Nobody designed the payment system to be the way it is today. It just kind of evolved. And when you think about the number of players involved in the fees that a merchant is paying, you don't see all of them, you don't interact with all of them, and that level of complexity is now approaching I would say almost a breaking point where it really does require some new intermediary, such as buying groups, to take that on for merchants and simplify things and get them a good deal.
Yeah. Well, it may not have been designed that way, but it sure feels like it sometimes, Lou. So let's do this. Since it's early in the morning and people have been shy about asking questions, let's finish with a quick lightning round here. And Reed, I'll put you on the spot first. If you're sitting in the audience, you're running convenience stores, what is the one biggest piece of advice you would want to give to yourself now, I suppose, in this analogy, in the payments area?
I think it would be to force myself, or if depending on where I am in the organization, force our team to spend time thinking about this stuff on a regular basis, to spend time engaging with this in a critical way, to go to websites like fasterpaymentscouncil.org and read the materials that are out there, read what the financial institutions are creating and read things that are pushing your understanding of where the future of payments is moving, because I think sometimes it can feel like this is all happening to you when really you could be part of what's happening if you sort of force yourself to do it.
I think that's good advice. Michael, what do you got? What's the one big piece of advice?
Okay, so I would say that first thing you really should consider is that, so the Genius Act is in place. Good thing, right? And for most people, they start at a zero state because it's like, okay, we have some regulation, great, then this market can move from here. But the truth is there are tens of millions of stablecoin mobile customers already in market, and that has happened and grown over the last few years. And that number is only represented through two wallets, which is the biggest wallets, MetaMask Mobile, which you may be familiar with, and then Coinbase Wallet, not the exchange, the wallet itself, right? Now there are hundreds of other Web3 wallets that can add to that number, but you get the gist, right? So if you apply this thinking into, okay, so the Genius Act is here, and during this year, the OCC, the SEC, Federal Reserve, as well as many others have reversed their digital asset utilization policy. It's pretty easy to expect more banks, more neobanks, more fintechs, and probably more Web3 wallets are going to compete for a share of customers' value in this world. So when you think about like the growth curve and like, is this an opportunity that we should get behind? We're somewhere in the middle of the growth curve that really allows for takeoff. There's actual activity, there's incentives there, there's now regulation, and does all of the above allow for competition and a wide amount of it? The answer to all that is yes. So from that perspective, it's worth taking in a strategy session with your team to understand really how you want to go about it.
Great. And Lou, transport yourself back. You're now at Circuit City, but it's a convenience store chain all of a sudden. What do you tell yourself to do?
No, absolutely. I think I would set my sights on a merchant, white label, merchant branded digital wallet, because that's the key enabling technology that allows you to then let customers put in that digital wallet. They can put faster payment methods. They can put stable coins in that digital wallet. The different products that Michael's talking about could be integrated with your digital wallet. So that becomes the hub, if you will, that can unify your loyalty program and your different payment methods in a way that not only saves cost, but helps you drive the top line and helps you pick up local market share. So I'm an evangelizer in some ways for the digital wallet, which I think is now much more available in a more cost-effective form than it was just a few years ago.
That's great. Thank you. A lot of consistency in that. So look, please, if everybody would help me thank all of these folks for being here with us and doing this panel with me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here.
And do appreciate all of you being here. And If you do the survey, thank you. We appreciate it. We would like that. Appreciate all of you being here and being here at the NACS show. Have a great time. Thank you.